I wanted to thank everyone here for attending now. I think we lost Michael.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay, all right, there you are. So I'll just get us started. My name is Dr. Erica Cirillo McCarthy, and I am the director of the University Writing Center, and I'm here presenting with my co-presenter. Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Michael Bailey. I'm the Director of Academic Integrity here at MTSU. I do apologize for not being on video. I don't know what's happening, but for some reason Zoom doesn't want to take a look at me today. So I do apologize.
So I'm going to share my screen, and I have a PowerPoint that we'll both go through. I'll start, and then Michael will take over the second half, but we'll be sure to leave ample time for questions and discussions afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And please, at any time, if my screen freezes or you can't see it, the PowerPoint, please let me know, because I know that sometimes happens. Can everyone see the PowerPoint, helping students prevent plagiarism, hacks, tips, and resources?
I can, and I see people are giving us thumbs up. So.
Okay, very good. Thanks so much. And then, Michael, maybe throughout my part of the presentation, you can take a look at chat, and if questions come up, you can let me know, and then I'll do the same for you for your part, if that's all right. All right, so I'll get us started. Our roadmap for today's workshop include the following. We're going to talk about why students plagiarize. I'm going to talk a little bit about ways in which we can reframe plagiarism, some prevention strategies, and then Michael's going to talk about current university policy and process and the pedagogical uses of Turnitin. So to start, I have this quote up there, and I won't read it to you. I'll have you all read it to yourselves. But I want you to read it and think about your feelings and your sense of plagiarism in students who plagiarize. Does this quote resonate with anyone out there? You can raise your hand or clap if that's the case. I want to acknowledge that this emotion is real and valid. This feeling of betrayal in some ways, right? This idea of plagiarism as a lie. It is a real emotion, and it is valid because so much of our work here in the academy relies on not plagiarizing, right? It is the coin of the realm in our work here at the academy. So it is really important, and it kind of strikes really close to what we do and how we do it and how we see our work functioning in the larger world outside of the university. But I think that this type of emotion can frame our interaction with students, with the writing assignment, and with our role as educators. Unexamined, these emotions lead us down the path to ask, how can we catch them? Instead, as Hall argues, we should ask, how can we prevent plagiarism? And one way to do that is to broaden our concept of what unethical citation practices are, alongside with providing faculty with resources to teach ethical citation practices and provide them with adequate support in preventing plagiarism, so that there's a robust campus-wide effort to prevent it. And this workshop is kind of one example of that.
Erica, I'd like to jump in real quick. I know you're going to talk about why do students plagiarize, but I kind of want to make sure that the professors know who are here today that in all my years of doing this, and all the many reasons why students would plagiarize, it never comes up, I'm plagiarizing against Professor or Dr. So-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it's very easy for us to take it personally. I do too. Why are these students doing it to an institution that I love? But their reasons are never against the professor or against the institution. Many times it's just simply about the grade more than anything else. And time management, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later as well, that help students with that. So I just kind of want to put that out there and I know it's difficult. I know that the professors do take it personally, but in all the excuses that students have used against me for many, many years, never has the I'm doing it because of against the professor has come up.
And I thank
Thank
you
you.
for adding that, Michael, to kind of give that context, because you interact with the students who have been accused of plagiarism, and you get to have those one-on-ones with them without that framework of that emotion, right?
Right. That's, I try to work with just what the professor's giving me and what the student's giving me. And you touched on it. I try to frame it around an educational framework
Mhm.
so that I can figure out why the student did what they did and then how to correct that so we never see them again, or that I never see them again. And it's usually, to be honest, it's usually about time management in most cases.
Mhm.
So anyway, thank you.
Well, that's great, because it leads us to this next slide here, right? Why do students plagiarize? And from a Writing Center perspective, I can tell you students' experiences. Students will go from writing a paper in APA for a psychology class, to writing a lab report in CSE style, to writing a business memo, to writing a research paper on gliders for their aerospace course. So all in 1 week, they could have these different demanding writing projects that ask them to master multiple disciplinary specific writing conventions. And studies have shown that as students learn a new disciplinary discourse, they temporarily drop the things that they've previously mastered, such as the ability to write coherently on a first draft, to citing sources ethically. So on this slide, you can see some of the challenges that students face when they're asked to do things like show you've done your own research, but make sure you write something new and original. Appeal to experts and authorities, but improve upon or disagree with these experts and authorities. Improve your English by mimicking what you have heard or read, but use your own words and your own voice. Give credit where credit is due, but make sure you make your own significant contribution. Now, all of us are we're well familiar with these challenges that we face when we have a writing project. But if you think about students, this creates a kind of chaotic, incoherent space in which they have to move from these different disciplinary conventions. So it also means that students are trying to enter or become part of a discipline, and they often write what they think someone in that discipline, or how someone in that discipline writes. And that's really a challenge if you think about how long it took you to write well in your discipline. Every time you assign writing, I would argue that the class needs to talk about ethical writing practices in open and transparent ways. So by just saying, if you plagiarize, you'll receive an F, and you may be referred to the Academic Integrity Office, that's really not enough for students. They might not know what that means. And so I want to encourage everyone to be really explicit about writing practices and ethical citation practices. So on this next slide, I talk a little bit more about how students see our discussion of plagiarism and how they view it differently than we do. So students often feel like it's like a gotcha type of activity, this idea of, I'm going to put your paper through Turnitin and see if you plagiarize. They kind of feel like they will plagiarize inadvertently, and they have everything at stake here. So they might lose everything, including scholarships or access to further education. Students don't really see their writing as contributing to a conversation in which everyone agrees to respect each other and follow the same rules. They see their writing within one context and for one audience member, you, the professor, and that's decoupled from a scholarly conversation between themselves, their sources, and their audience, whether that audience is perceived or real. So what does that mean? They don't really see themselves as experts so that they can contribute to a conversation. So it's a real challenge for them to see the importance of their voice in this conversation. So therefore, it gets a little muddied when we talk about citing our sources and then adding to the conversation. in the same vein, they hear ideas and they really can't see the difference between their ideas, their classmates' ideas, their professors' ideas. So they feel doomed before they even start. And this is especially important in really robust dialectical classrooms. So classrooms where there's a lot of dialogue going on, that also muddies the waters somewhat for students. So because it's not clear cut to students, we really want to make it explicit at every turn. Some other things that we mention a lot when we talk about plagiarism are terms like common knowledge, right? This is usually cited as the exception to citing. If it's common knowledge, there's no citation necessary, but students often find it difficult to discern what's common knowledge and what isn't. So you want to make sure you provide examples for them. One example I use, the 16th president of the United States is Abraham Lincoln. That's common knowledge. It does not need to be cited. So providing common knowledge examples is really useful for students so they know the difference. Originality is also a concept I think that is challenging for students. How to write an original argument that synthesizes other voices. That's a complex cognitive process. So you want to make sure you scaffold assignments to help students make those connections and understand how to write an original argument that does all of those things. Own work, right? Use your own work. That's a gray area for students. If they write it, isn't it their own work? So that's a kind of an ambiguous term for students. Author. Students find it hard to see themselves as an author or the author. All right, so you want to talk about their work and their writing in relationship to sources, their peers, and how it's all situated so that they can kind of understand their role when they're writing in your classroom. And then borrowing. Borrowing is a real complex term for students. It's further complicated by digital writing, right? For example, reposting, remixing, reusing. All of those things complicate the term borrowing in ways that didn't affect people of a different generation. So we want to take all of those into account. All right, so how do we reframe plagiarism? An alternative model of plagiarism would reframe our perspective to one that sees copying of the text as an indication that the student hasn't fully developed critical reading skills. All right, so again, rather than they're doing this because they want to get out of this classroom or they want to get one over on me instead, perhaps it's a critical reading challenge. And are there ways that we could solve that problem by a deeper engagement in ethical citation practices in the classroom? So what that would do is it reframes our perspective of students who are no longer like lazy or morally dishonest to instead students who are grappling with new disciplinary conventions. And then that puts the onus on us as to how we can fix that. And then here's some further sources for you. Rebecca Moore Howard, Jonathan Hall, Baranin and Roy and Margaret Price, they all offer some really useful strategies for reframing how we view plagiarism. So here are some prevention strategies for you that you can take to your classroom. Early on, have an open conversation with students. That's why we're so happy to offer this workshop so early in the semester. I know that I'm meeting with my students right now to talk about their first major writing project. So this is a great time, right, to have this conversation with students. You want to explain plagiarism and convey clear policies, but also I encourage you to invite students to talk about how they see plagiarism and to share their ethical writing practices. So you can make it a dialogue, perhaps even on D2L discussion board, since a lot of us are teaching remotely. So you can ask them, what is plagiarism? How do they see it? And challenge them to consider why it's inappropriate. You might want to ask them, why might a student plagiarize? And what do they think the consequences of plagiarism should be? But this next question is really important, and it would really help you as educators get an idea of where your students are in regards to ethical citation practices. Do they know the differences between quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing? And in particular, do they know the difference between those three in your disciplinary field? So that's something that you want to have a conversation about. It really won't take up too much time outside of your content. I think it would add much value to your conversations in your classroom. So some further strategies for you to tailor assignments carefully to the content of your course and design assignments that require students to explore a subject in depth. And why do we do that? It's so important to assign writing in content-based classes, because studies have shown that when a student has to write about a particular concept, they engage with that concept more deeply. And I think that's some of the reasons why we assign writing in our classrooms. So, so it's great that you do that. So how can we help them? We can work with students to help select possible topics early, develop and sequence assignment schedules for students that allow them time to explore as they work towards defined topics, coach students through each step of the research process, and make that process visible, right? Including the technology part. And our research librarians here at Walker Library are great at helping faculty do that. And then talk about different genres. Remember what it was like when you were an undergraduate and you were going through multiple disciplinary conventions, multiple classes. Even though you've had your PhD or your advanced degree in your field for a while and you're kind of really familiar with that particular disciplinary convention, feel free to talk about how you navigated between different disciplines in your gen ed courses and how that can better help your students. Or you can talk about if you're a graduate instructor, when you entered graduate school and you entered a different level of that disciplinary convention, what were the strategy you used to help you understand the disciplinary conventions in ways that prevented you from plagiarizing and understanding the ethical citation practices within that convention? So this list is from the Council of Writing Program Administrators. I just wanted to point that out. All right. Now, this last slide is the last slide of prevention strategies. You want to distinguish between misuse of sources and plagiarism. And I feel like this is at the heart of my presentation here. You want to ask yourself, are they misusing sources, or is there an intentional plagiarism? I think there's a distinction, as I've kind of laid out to you. And if we reframe the way we approach plagiarism, it might help us better answer this question. So misuse of sources, it signals to us that students might not know how to use sources ethically. So this is an opportunity for us to show students how to do it. So if you can ask yourself that when you encounter plagiarism, I think that might be really useful. We don't want to put Michael out of business, but if we can send less students because we've worked closely with them and helping them understand ethical citation practices, that might work out better for us and the students as well.
Well, and Erica, I want to talk about one, because one of the questions that I got on the chat was basically asking if there was a group that plagiarized more, if freshmen plagiarized more, for instance. And what I wrote back was that it's not more common that freshmen plagiarize, but what is more common is that freshmen do not know how to cite properly or do not know how to paraphrase properly. So what we're getting as cases from freshmen particularly is that it's simply a case that they don't know how to write an academic paper, as opposed to an intentional plagiarism. And I think that I encourage professors, especially with freshmen, to work with them and so forth, and so that they can learn how to cite properly and so forth. I see that mostly in freshmen, especially in some of the heavy writing courses, psychology, philosophy, history. They just have never had to write an academic paper before. So they don't know how to cite properly. They don't know how to paraphrase properly. And technically it is plagiarism. But again, from that mind frame of a educational approach, we can address it from that standpoint as opposed to punishing them for plagiarizing when they may not even understand what that means.
Yeah, thank you so much for detailing your answer to that. I think that was a great question. And then understanding the answer, okay, yes, freshmen are the most often referred students to your office. However, that doesn't mean they're the ones that plagiarize the most. They're just the ones that are caught up in this challenge of learning a new disciplinary convention. And I think at the heart of your answer is, let's not assume that our students know this. We don't want to assume that they do. We can't assume that they've written research papers before they got to MTSU that incorporates multiple sources and written in the style guide that you expect them to write in, right? So perhaps they're really familiar with MLA, but they might not know Chicago style or APA. So these are all the things that we want to make sure. Go ahead.
Exactly. And that's the other problem that we have at every institution that I've done this job at, is that history requires one style, psychology requires one style, English requires one style, the sciences require another. And if you're a freshman taking History 101, English 101, biology, all of that, you may have to write 5 different papers in 5 different styles.
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, there's actually no one who's teaching them how to do that. Because I've talked to professors at multiple universities, and if they're not an English professor, their first thing will always be to me, well, I don't teach them how to write. That's for an English professor to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is, when I talk to English professors, outside of English 1020 that we have here, outside of that research class, their response to me is, I don't teach them how to write, I teach them literature. I teach them grammar. I teach them this. So we actually don't have a class, with the exception of 1020, which some students take and some students take in their sophomore year, a class that actually teaches them how to write an academic paper in a particular style. And that can be confusing for students as well.
And they might take 1020 in dual enrollment, or
Yes.
they might test out of it. And it's
Don't
also
get me started on dual enrollment at 1020, please.
It's almost an impossibility to expect one course to introduce students and help them develop competency in all of these multiple style guides and different disciplinary discourses. So I think you're right about that. And I have to tell you, I've been working in writing centers since 2003, and I thought I knew all the styles out there. There are more style guides than anybody can imagine. Just last month, I received an email from a professor of sociology saying, hey, do your tutors know this sociology style guide? And I was like, what? I didn't even know it existed. And even within the sciences, there's multiple style guides within the sciences. So these are all the things that we're asking students to navigate. And I think we have an ethical obligation to support that navigation with scaffolded assignments and clear, explicit discussions on plagiarism, for sure.
One of the things I did and I'm sure that our people watching today do as well, when I taught psychology, and I taught Psychology 101, and obviously I expected some papers, one of my first week classes was about how to write an academic paper, how to cite, how to write properly, what paraphrasing is, and things like that. Yes, that meant I had to kind of cram some things in later on because I took that time, but I think it helped with the writing in general later on with stuff. And I gave lots of examples as well. I tried to give out a little example sheet as well so that students could look at stuff. So that was something I did back in the dark ages. So.
Well, in the dark ages, I'm really happy that people in history and psychology and aerospace and math education assign writing. Because again, I think writing is a really great cognitive exercise to help students understand difficult concepts, right? And make those connections between sources. But I'm looking at a comment from Anne that put in the chat, students push back and say, this isn't an English class. But I think, Anne, what you can push back and say, no, but this is a history class and we communicate through writing about history. Because of that, you're going to want to become effective at communicating within this discipline. And these are the disciplinary conventions of a history research paper. But that is funny. And I think that, yeah, students think they only have to write in English classes. So we just have to push back against that perception for sure. My last comment here, my last slide is, oh, here, sometimes I forget that I'm sharing my screen. What do you consider your pedagogical goals, right? So what do you want the student to take away from the experience? I just saw a brief comment about grammar. Is grammar what you want your students to take away from it? Is a deep and rigid focus on, say, periods and commas in their citation, is that what you wanted them to take away from it? And then you just want to ask yourself why. If that's the answer, okay, well, why? What will they take with them to future classes if that is a real tightly focused part of your class? Can we act in a way that supports learning? Listen, you're all here today. I think that illustrates that you are dedicated, empathetic faculty who want to help your students grow as writers and help them become experts in your discipline. So I think this is one example that you're acting in a way that supports their learning. We can shift from summative evaluation to formative evaluation. I think that's really useful. So how can this experience inform future writing strategies? I also do a workshop on effective feedback on student writing that really focuses on that. It's not about this particular text, but how can you help the student grow into an effective communicator within your disciplinary conventions? And then if you do have someone who you suspect is, who has plagiarized, ask for documentation and talk with the student about their sources. Then have a discussion. And I think Michael might back me up on this. Is that kind of the steps that you would encourage faculty to take rather than them sending students directly to you, or?
Well, I always encourage the faculty to talk to students, and I am one that believes that, you know, if it is a minor case, you know, a sentence, maybe even a paragraph out of a paper, that it can be handled in class, it can be handled as an educational standpoint. And then if there is a repeat case, they can always let me know in the case report that we had a case earlier in the semester, we dealt with it in class, but now it's come up again. And then I can talk to the student about, well, your professor worked with you already on this. Why did you repeat the behavior? That type of thing. So yes, long answer, short answer is yes.
Awesome, that works out well. And actually that leads to the next slide, Michael, and I'm going to ask you to kind of take it away. And that's, I can get it there.
I think you're going to have to click for me.
Yes, I will do that.
Okay.
So can you see this, the different definitions? Okay.
Yep.
Good.
So we do have some official definitions of what plagiarism, cheating, fabrication is. We're talking mainly about plagiarism today. And of course, that is, as you can see there, the adoption or reproduction of ideas, words, statements, images, works of another person's, and so forth. And we've put in the recent years the self-plagiarism statement. And that is because we are seeing a lot more cases of students putting in a paper from a previous class that's on the same topic and so forth, even though the professor has said, I want original work. And I want to stress that every time that I get these self-plagiarism cases, I tell the student that the professor wants original work in their class, even if it's the same topic that you've already written about. And that the student can go and talk to the professor and say, look, last year I took this class, it's on the same topic, I've already written a paper on that, can I submit that? And what I think most professors will probably do, which is one thing that I did back in the day, was I said, yes, but I want you to add to it. So you wrote that paper a year ago. Is there anything new you can add to it? Do you have any new thoughts about it? Things like that. Of course, professors are welcome to say no as well, okay? So we have had to put in the self-plagiarizing because we are seeing it a little bit more and more. Now I will say this, is that there are times when people will disagree on what a definition of plagiarism actually is. And I try to stay pretty conservative, I guess I would say, although I don't like that word, but conservative in what plagiarism is. But at the same time, if it is something that I look at as kind of minor, I may contact a professor and say, you know, this was a 10-page paper and it was only one sentence that he did not quote properly. Is that something we can talk about in a classroom situation, take some points off of the grade, instead of having this student go through the process in my house and having a 5-year record on his educational records, okay? And sometimes the professors understands that, and sometimes the professor is like, no, this is plagiarism, I want him to go through. And then I have the conversation with the student. And many times in those cases, it's just, oh man, I completely forgot to do that. I forgot to put that as a quotation. I wrote it down in my notes and I forgot to write it as a quotation, which is why then I go back to the student and say, when you're taking something from another source and you're writing it directly from that source, in your notes, always put it in quotation marks and always write down the citation right then and there. Because a month later, when you're actually writing the paper, you'll know that it's a direct quotation, okay? Go ahead to the next slide.
And we call that citing while writing. I just wanted to say.
Exactly.
Encourage students to do that. They don't do that.
I know. So one of the things that I think I would like to see a little bit more often in with professors, especially professors in high writing classes, is to allow their students to check their papers prior to a final submission, okay? And the reason I want this is because, and we'll go over these instructions in a second, but the reason I like this is because it gives the student an opportunity, especially for those students who I see that either they don't know how to cite properly, or most important, they don't know how to paraphrase properly. They can see it and then they can correct it and learn from that experience before their final submission. I see a lot of students and a lot of students who are paraphrasing improperly actually tell me that, well, that's how they learned in high school how to paraphrase. They were told in high school to paraphrase it this way. And it's actually not, because what's happening is that it's what we call patchworking in writing, in which they take out a couple of words here and there and then put in their own words. And I have to explain to the student that that's not paraphrasing. And I always send them to the writing center to work on paraphrasing with the writers there. But Turnitin, if we can check it with Turnitin, it also gives them an opportunity to check their work, make sure that they've hit everything that they're supposed to, make sure they haven't forgotten to cite something that they should be citing, and then they can submit the final thing. Now, as you see here, the following is the list of the checking on how to do that. First, you log into D2L, you go into your own course. You click on assignments on the navigation bar, and then you click Dropbox. You'll click a new folder, and you'll type whatever you want to as a name for this folder. So draft chapter 1, something like that. And then you type whatever instructions you want for the students to follow in creating this particular thing. And then you click on the Turnitin tab and make sure that you check the check the enable grade mark for this folder and check enable originality check, okay?
Go ahead and show the screen with all that on it, yeah.
Yeah, what this will do is make sure that the paper that they're submitting doesn't go into the general database for Turnitin, okay? It's not going to be graded and it's not going to be turned in to the database for that. Because what would happen is if you turned it in just regularly and then the final submission is turned in, it'll pop up because it will look like you're cheating from another student in MTSU, okay? It'll come up again. So you want to make sure that you do that, okay? And then go to the next one. And then you also have to click on the additional options, which here is where you click on the do not store the submitted papers, okay? And then you click submit and it's done, okay?
So that's the do not store.
Right.
Right there. Because Turnitin is essentially a database, right,
Yes.
of student works. And if a student keeps posting and putting their work in that database, their new revisions will be continually checked up against that, and it'll keep coming up a high percentage of plagiarized work. Is that right, Michael?
That's correct, which is why it's very important to do this last step, which is the do not submit or store the submitted papers, okay? That way it won't keep coming up, okay? You also want to make sure that you allow submissions of any type of file. Some students will just submit it as a PDF. Some students will submit it as a Word document. So any type of file is submitted. And at the end of this, students will be able to submit their paper to that draft folder. And then they, if I understand Turnitin correctly, they will actually be able to see their own report as far as what's happening, where it's going, and things like that, okay? And then hopefully, if they are pulling up a lot, be able to go back to the professor and say, hey, what's going on? I don't know how to rewrite this in order for it not to come back. Or I thought I cited it properly. What do I need to do? That type of things, okay? And things like that. One of the things I do want to talk about with Turnitin is that sometimes with the grade or the score that professors will get, it'll look like it's, let's say 26%. But that's also pulling things like a date, a class name, sometimes an assignment name. If some professors require that their papers are all given the same title, they'll pick up that. They'll pick up things like that. If a student is actually quoting something that's been quoted before, it's going to pick up that. So when I get these reports, if a professor turns it in, I go over these reports, but I also go over and look at exactly what Turnitin is picking up and seeing. I had one paper that was about 30% plagiarized, but when I looked at it, it was picking up quotes that were cited properly. And I had to contact the professor and say, okay, unless I'm missing something, every quote that's been picked up and everything that was picked up by Turnitin was a properly cited quotation. And the professor told me, oh, well, I just looked at the number. And if it's anything over a certain percentage, I'd automatically turn it in. So I always encourage professors to also look at the body of the text and to see what is being pulled up, okay? As well as that number, because again, that number is going to include a title, if you're requiring all your students to write the same title, the class name, the date, the university, if you're requiring them to say Middle Tennessee State University, that's going to pull up. And then any quotation that's been used in other papers, okay? But I do think that by allowing the students to check their papers through Turnitin will serve two things. Number one, the most important, I think they will learn how to write papers properly, and they'll see from their own mistakes and how to correct their own mistakes. And then two, obviously, they'll get less cases through me, which eventually helps their educational career, because if they go on to grad school, law school, med school, and those schools contact me and say, well, did this student have an academic misconduct case? And I have to say yes, but it happened in their freshman year because they didn't know how to write properly. All they really care about is, well, they had a case, if that makes any sense. So, okay. I think that's it for my area.
And I'm glad you brought up the high stakes nature of this, Michael,
Yeah.
accusing someone of plagiarism can have real material effects for students. So I think that's, one wonderful reason for us to pay close attention to these ethical citation practices. And I just want to add on to kind of what you said about the usefulness of Turnitin. I think helps students notice when they're facing an ethical citation problem, and then that's key for them to go to their professor or to the writing center to get support, right? Because that's when they're like, wait a minute, I'm not paraphrasing. Taking one word and changing it out per sentence is not paraphrasing. But paraphrasing is a real tough skill that takes time to develop and deepen, but we can help with that for sure. All right, so now I'd love to open it up to any questions that people have. Please feel free to unmute yourself. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. So yeah, if you want to unmute yourself and ask questions, we have some time here.
I'll just, one question that Janet just asked me was, do most graduate schools contact MTSU about academic misconduct? And I thought I sent it. I'm actually contacted from time to time at this institution, but not as much as I have been at other institutions. I am kind of amazed at the low level of contact that I do have from graduate schools, law schools, med schools about here. I've been at other institutions where about every other third phone call was a phone call from a graduate school saying, we're just checking to see. But here I get maybe 2 or 3 a month, maybe.
Anne put a kind of post there in the chat that said the area that Anne's struggling with is plagiarism and D2L discussion posts. Anne, do you want to expand upon that or tell us a little bit about some of the challenges with plagiarism in the discussion posts?
Yeah, I'm in history and I teach 5 survey classes and we have discussions every week. And because it's exclusively online, that's the primary component of the interaction in the class. And I try to prep them for their papers by requiring them to cite the sources in their discussion posts, and not major full-blown citations, but the name of the book and the page number, because we have multiple textbooks. And most of them eventually get the hang of that and do that. But a lot of them, not a lot of them, some of them will copy somebody's post and then, like y'all were describing, paraphrase it very badly and paste it as their own. And it's really hard when you have 150 students that are all required to make 4 discussion posts to catch that as it's happening. And then when you notice the similarities, you have to go back and look at timestamps and who posted first and who was logged in when. And I just, when I find that it's happened and it's egregious, I will email the person and say, hey, I noticed this. This is awfully similar to somebody else's post that was posted before yours. Can you explain to me what happened? And sometimes they explain to me, oh, well, I was crunched for time and I didn't know what else to do. And they said what I meant. I'm like, well, you're going to get a 0 this week, but let's don't do it again. And usually that's enough. But some of them, if they spend as much time on their actual discussion posts as they do trying to trick the system, it would make their lives easier, and it would make my life easier. But D2L, the way the discussion board is set up, makes it very, very difficult to catch that in process. And if anybody has any tips, I would love, is there a way to set an AI agent up to flag it? Because it's just really frustrating when you're knee deep in discussion posts and you go, oh, really? I have to police this too? Oh, And you cannot have them run through Turnitin. It's impossible.
I think your frustration is pretty common amongst faculty who care about what they do, right? And that's pretty much everyone here at MTSU. So I can totally understand you're in a kind of, you're in a flow, you're reading through discussion posts, and then you come across that, and then like, okay, now I have to shift gears from, educating to now I have to police, as you mentioned. But I'm wondering, I think there's a function on discussion boards where you disallow anybody from viewing anyone's post until they post their own. Does anybody have any experience with that? Does that sound right?
I use that. There is that function if you set up your discussion threads that way. But what they have done, they have figured this out. You make a post, you like type the word "the" in it, post it, go back and read somebody else's, copy it, and then edit their own post.
They've hacked it.
There's a way around that too.
Yeah, anyone else have any advice for Anne?
Can you disallow editing where they're only allowed to post once?
I haven't seen that option to disallow editing. And in a way,
Just one post.
well, the way the threads are set up, I post the thread and they respond to me, and then they respond to each other's post.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
And they need to have multiple responses. And
it's tough when
so
you
it's
have
like,
it's tough when you have the things you're doing. Anne, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you. You're my friend, and I but it's tough when you have something you're trying to do that the method of making it, of avoiding plagiarism or hacking is sort of detracts from the actual lesson for everybody else. Like, there's a part of me that's just like, okay, so you're going to disable, you're not going to let people see each other's posts, and you're going to, and so no one's going to have to be pressured to come up with something new. And you're sort of losing the beauty of discussion threads, of response, like you're saying, Anne, like responding multiple times, and maybe someone says something and you want to edit your post, and that's not a bad thing. It's hard to see you have to disable features of discussion to ward off the person who's kind of taking advantage of the system,
it really is frustrating. So what I've sometimes I can tell a pattern. I can find a pattern in somebody's post, and I just, make a little note to myself just to keep an eye out for them, because I really don't want that one bad apple, and it's usually only one or two in a class, to spoil it for the rest of the class. Because for a lot of them, they are freshmen, or they're coming from backgrounds where they have not engaged in a lot of academic discussion and a lot of theoretical discussion, particularly around history. And they get really excited, and they start to see things in a different way. And those discussion board posts are such a great tool to help them develop their analytical and critical reasoning skills that they can then apply to their bigger papers, not just in history classes, but in all classes. And I don't want to take that away from them by, like you said, Michelle, disabling the features that help so many other students.
Mm-hmm.
I wish there was just a filter.
Well, I mean, I think you're doing all that you can, and in helping them see the value in this discussion tool. The fact that you said most of them get it towards the end shows me that maybe these students are shy or hesitant about sharing their ideas, not just because they have time issues, which is what Michael pointed to earlier with this time management, but they also might not feel comfortable sharing their ideas on a public space like these discussion boards. And that's not to excuse them taking other people's ideas and reformulate into their own, but that might be perhaps some of their motivation. So I guess in the framework of this workshop, I would say call them out when they do it and say, what I expect from you is your own response to this text or your own engagement, and then just keep pushing them in that direction. And if it's only a handful, I know it's so hard to not focus on those ones that cause us anxiety, but if it's just a handful, focus on all the good work that you're doing with the other students and just pay a little extra attention to these handful if that's possible. Although you said you have 5 survey courses, right?
150 beautiful students.
That's a lot. So I hope that helps. Anyone else have any strategies for Anne?
No, just empathy. Lots of empathy, Anne.
You're doing the right thing. Just keep on doing it.
I agree, though. It's not a bad feature suggestion for Turnitin or a similar technology. I mean, it'd be great if there was a way that that could be flagged.
Yeah, but then you get into the whole, you know, a lot of them just, they paraphrase the question as their intro into their answer. And then that would just go ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
Totally would. Yes, exactly.
But thank y'all very much. And thank you for the validation that at least I'm trying.
For sure. Other questions? Brandon, are you clapping or raising your hand?
Oh, I was just clapping. This was very helpful. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I'm so happy that I get to work with experts like Michael on this. You know, I see this issue from one perspective and Michael sees it from another, but that place where we meet, that intersection, I think is so generative and fruitful for faculty. So, so we hope to offer this at least once a semester for other faculty who weren't able to attend. And then also we have it recorded, so it'll be available on the LT and ITC, I think their YouTube channel, if that's right, Scott.
And one thing I'd like to say, which I tell people a lot today with our technology that we're out there and the social media that's out there and all that, is that students today are seeing a lot of plagiarism on social media, on different websites and so forth. I'm a research person. I go in and I'll type something and 15,000 websites will pop up and I'll look at pretty much all of them. And then I start suddenly seeing the same article written over and over again. And it's not cited. It's not, anything is not like, this was originally published in blah, blah, blah. And, you know, if I'm seeing that, being as old as I am, students who are more tech savvy are seeing that every single day. And I know that from talking to some students, they have actually said, well, I see it every day on the internet. Why isn't it okay for me just to take something from one group and put it into my own paper? So we kind of have to educate them to that it's not okay. But also we need, I think, to understand that they are seeing this on a daily basis. They are seeing in multiple areas the same article or the same quote or the same social, you know, repeat that's done in a daily basis. Also with our international students, there are some countries, China is one, I want to say India, but I'm not 100% sure on India anymore, that they allow their students to simply take from the internet and put it into their paper. And so then they come over to this country and they think they can continue writing that way. And we just need to understand that sometimes our international students may have a very different approach to writing papers than the American style is, okay?
Yeah, I think all of that leads to, let's not make any assumptions, right, about our students, and their grasp or understanding of plagiarism is the same as ours. And I think that's right. Some pretty good advice there. All right. Well, listen, thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. Please tell the rest of your faculty or any colleagues if they're interested in this and they weren't able to attend to take a look at the recording. But again, I think Michael and I will probably offer this pretty regularly because I think having these discussions, this is just a start. So I just want to let you know that we intend to hopefully support faculty in all the ways that we can in supporting your students. So, all right, everyone, thanks. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Take
Thanks,
care.
Erica.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.